Welcome into yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I am your host, Chu, and today we will be talking the NFL draft, and I will be mentioning a couple of dynasty buys and sells. So, as I just mentioned, so excited for the NFL draft to finally be here. It feels like months ago that we had the last bit of actionable dynasty news when it came to seeing free agency happen. You know, of course, we saw everything with rookies, with the combine and all that, but it feels like so long ago. I can honestly say I'm so thankful that, the NFL, I think, has truly conquered the, remaining relevant for the most it possibly can throughout the year, considering how long this season itself is and the Super Bowl and playoffs and all that. But very excited. Of course, all of the chaos is coming out in the media. The rumor mill is running strong, I guess we should say, with teams talking about trading, not trading, whether it be picks, whether it be trading current players to move up or whatever. So we'll see what actually happens. What is the the truth that is being spouted there? But looking forward to finding out draft capital, landing spots, really being able to refine and complete these rookie profiles or rookie evaluations or rankings that we have heading into dynasty rookie drafts. Obviously, for a lot of people, say if you're in multiple leagues, you could very well have a rookie draft coming up the week of or the weekend after the NFL draft concludes. Of course, you have landing spots and that sort of thing. You don't really need to wait for the season to do a dynasty rookie draft. So again, last chance to get ready for those rookie drafts. And jumping into the first bit of talk here, I'm going to talk about, two notes on each position group as it relates to the rookies in the NFL draft. But another wrinkle that I added in here when I was, the nighttime routine with my son, Finn, getting him ready for, giving him his chicken nuggets, getting him a bath, getting him into bed. So I went ahead and I asked him, either or with two prospects from each position, and it is audio only. I tried to amp it up a little bit because as we were doing our bedtime routine and everything, so we'll see if we can hear it or not. But let me know what you think of Finn's picks. By the way, I do agree with most of them. There's one that I was a little less excited about. But jumping over to the first one, this is J.J. McCarthy or Michael Penix, and here's what Finn had to say.
Michael Penix.
Michael Penix, indeed. Could not agree more. I really, really do not understand the hype around J.J. McCarthy. But, I'm not too blind to understand, how Michael Penix ended his collegiate career. That's the game that's freshest in everyone's minds. And understandably, that is held in the highest regard when it comes to facing a high level of competition and really not showing up as well as he had previously. For J.J. McCarthy, he's someone who it's pretty obvious that he has not had the amount of snaps and dropbacks and playing time and that sort of thing that his fellow classmen have. He is younger, but also even on that Michigan team, I know everyone's beat it to death at this point. He was taken out a tremendous amount, and or the running game and ultimately the Michigan defense was able to kind of control games. And you can view that in one of two ways. You can see it as he didn't need to do that. They could just give it to Blake Corum and it would be fine. You could view it as he couldn't do it and they didn't trust him because they thought he was relatively efficient. So I guess the only real believable concern would be they thought if they gave him too much work, he wouldn't be able to process it effectively and he would be turning the ball over. Because otherwise, if he's not tremendously, effective and what have you, but is still holding onto the ball, well, Michigan wants to score and wants to keep the ball going down the field. I think he showed enough in terms of being able to operate within the offense, but it was pretty limited to throwing between the numbers, kind of a one-speed guy, wasn't really layering it down the field, certainly outside the numbers. So I don't really know how that's going to go, how teams are going to evaluate him. But I myself think Michael Penix, he can make every throw. Again, I know he had, so many injuries throughout his career. He's a bit older. But I believe in his talent, And for fantasy, I understand the upside of McCarthy with his rushing ability. I don't think Penix is a slouch by any means, but I think he would much, much, much prefer stay back behind the line of scrimmage in the pocket and just deliver from there, which I think he could do effectively. So jumping into two other notes here on the rookie quarterback. So we know what's happened at number 1. In terms of number 2 and number 3, I do still think we know in terms of the names. Again, there's been much talk, as I just mentioned, J.J. McCarthy, is he going second or third possibly? Who's trading up, who's trading back, what have you. Under the assumption that it is Washington staying at 2, I do still think the Patriots stay at 3. I think it'll be Jaden Daniels going 2 and Drake May going 3. I don't know that the Patriots, given what their team looks like right now, new head coach, that sort of thing, that they would forego with the 3rd pick getting a quarterback. Could be wrong. They could roll with Jacoby Brissett. I forgot who else is on the depth chart for that team. They could very well do that. Entirely possible. I don't think they're going to do that, though. And whether it is flip-flopped or whether it is Drake May actually going to Washington, I don't know. But I have Jaden Daniels, at least from a fantasy perspective, as my quarterback 2. And from a lot of the reports, it does sound like Jaden Daniels could very well go 2. I think there was some rumblings of some issues happening with Jaden Daniels and Washington's camp throughout the process in the last couple weeks or so. But who knows what's true? Who knows, if it's just a smokescreen? I'm not gonna get into all that. But just to say, likely at 2 and 3, I feel like it's still going to be Daniels in May. And in terms of McCarthy, as we just talked about him a little bit. Do I think someone's going to move up to 4 to take him? The Cardinals are at 4. In no world are they going to take a quarterback. Instead, they're likely going to be taking Marvin Harrison Jr. And given what their team looks like right now, again, I believe they have a later first as well. So this is not their only first, which is tremendously helpful. I'm kind of in disbelief that they would trade out of the 4 spot, depending on how far they'd have to go down. Because you're missing out on Marvin Harrison Jr., and depending on how far you go down, I assume you miss out on Malik Neighbors, probably Roma Dunze also. Then you're getting into the area of the Brian Thomas Jr. You're getting into I do like Troy Franklin. Probably later first, maybe early second, hopefully Panthers. But not too sure about that. I really think the Cardinals are going to stay there, but if a team were to move up to 4, there's been talk of the Vikings, there's been talk of the Broncos. I don't see it. I really don't. I don't know that McCarthy falls out of the top 10. I do think at 9, the Bears may trade out of that for someone trying to get McCarthy, assuming it falls to 9. But again, he's been so hyped up in the pre-draft process. You can say the same about Will Levis previously. There's been countless, quarterbacks that maybe have been hyped up to a certain degree and they take a tumble for whatever reason, whether it be all of the previous reports were simply just smoke and mirrors, or all of that was true, and then once the draft actually started, you actually get to see how the draft boards fall, and it's just chaos there. So, yeah, don't think anyone's going to be trading up to 4 for McCarthy, but what do I know? I am not a GM, so I'm sure I'll be looking stupid next week. So for the running backs, so the players I had Finn pick between Audric, Estime, and Braelon Allen. So let's see who he picked. Braelon Allen, okay. So I'm going to have to disagree with Finn on that one. Disagreeing with a 5-year-old, and shows how old I am. But, I understand it. And, Braelon Allen is high on a lot of people's boards, and I don't even mean compared to Estime. I think, ranked higher than even a number of other players. I just picked them for both being their big bruising style of play. Allen, of course, it's talked about. He's a very, very young prospect. Came in and actually was playing on defense, I believe, and actually switched over to running back and was tremendously productive in his first season there. For Estime, he is, again, another big back. Pretty nimble for his size, but still big, and nimble is only just comparative to his size. He is still, he's no, LaShawn McCoy. I'm not saying anything like that, but I think he's pretty nimble for his size. And looking at those two guys, I don't know how close in terms of the NFL draft. I don't know how close they're going to be drafted together. Very curious to know where they're going to go. In terms of landing spots for running backs this year, a couple off the top of my head outside of the Cowboys, which is probably the most obvious one. The LA Chargers, I know they got J.K. Dobbins. I know they basically just reincarnated the Ravens backfield with Dobbins and Gus Edwards, but I still think they're probably going to get another body there. Is it going to be Blake Corum? Very possible. New York Giants, you lose Saquon, you get Devin Singletary, who was not bad in Houston by any means. And given the number of needs that the Giants have, I don't think that it's tremendously important for them to be getting a running back. Then again, looking at these running backs, and I'll talk about it in a second, think about how many may be falling to third, maybe fourth round. So I think they do get a running back prior to the fifth round. And last but not least, Carolina Panthers. So I tried to take my blinders off, and I am a believer in Chuba Hubbard. Not so much Miles Sanders. I do think he can be a viable, second back in a committee, but I think he's fallen pretty far from grace after his tremendous season last season in Philly that got him this contract that led him to Carolina, and then not much to speak of since then. But Chuba Hubbard, he's done well in what was available to him last year. And when I look at Canales coming over from Tampa Bay, what he was able to do with Rachaad White, I think he can do a version of that with Chuba Hubbard. I do think they do a lot of things similarly, and he really grinded it out with White in the first portion of the season last year in 2023. Not to tremendous success in terms of rushing efficiency, but again, he was targeted a lot too. It was more about establishing the run, sticking with it, and giving steady volume that eventually worked to help open up the pass game and that sort of thing. And I do think that's going to be some version of that Canales is going to try and do in Carolina. So I do think Chuba Hubbard can manage that workload and hopefully get more targets this season than he did last season, but we'll see. And as I kind of mentioned there, so thinking about last year versus this year, so no first-round running backs, let alone the two that were drafted last year. And in looking at a number of mocks, I'm trying to even think how many running backs are going to be taken in the second round. Now, I feel like one is the most, and maybe two. But I mean, if you're giving me the odds are 1.5, I'm picking one. Absolutely. That's going to be tricky because I feel like there's so much value elsewhere, and I feel like in the first round, the number of quarterbacks, wide receivers, tackles, offensive linemen, cornerbacks. I mean, there's so many. Once I'm really trying to build a mock, when you start listing people out, you end up getting halfway through the second round, you're like, I don't really know how many running backs are gonna be going here. So jumping over to the wide receivers. So Finn, I had him pick between Jalen Polk or Ricky Pearsall. Both of these are my guys, so really he could not lose here. And his answer was yes, and he said J-Mo Polk. Sometimes I learned last year when I had him do a lot, help me out with one matchup or one lineup decision for Scott Fishbowl 13. I learned that he just started saying the wrong name, but then would just repeat it. So in his mind, Jalen Polk is J-Mo Polk. Still a pretty cool name. So he went with Polk there. Don't disagree. I'm a huge, huge Polk fan. I think he was, I don't think he was, outshined by Odunze. The trio of receivers for Washington is pretty tremendous. So outshined, I think, is maybe pretty unfair. I think they each had roles that they did tremendously well. Odunze being the best of them. I'm not saying he's not. But Jalen Polk can do so many things so well, which is probably a cliche and a very lazy answer, but he could work all over the field. He's got a big, long frame, tremendous hands, top 3 hands in this draft class, in my opinion. Very good at working across the middle and being able to high point these balls even through traffic a bit. Again, I mentioned the height and the radius to him. He's tall, but he's not too kind of tall and lumbering. He moves very well. He doesn't have the 4.4 speed. I think it was a 4.52 at the combine, if I remember correctly. But just watching his play speed, very smooth, very crisp routes, not the sharp Lad McConkey type stuff. Again, but very good. A lot of stuff. He just does so many things above average. So like that a lot. Ricky Pearsall, another guy, super sharp on those routes. I know for most of the things, for ever doing graphics or anything, I'm usually using Ricky Pearsall's tremendous catch, grabbing over the body like this. I do think he's another one, top 3 in the class in hands. Mostly can, I think once he makes it to the NFL, he will likely be working out of the slot, but can do both in terms of inside and outside. And I don't just see him as, given his stature, he is a bit slight in terms of the measurements. But watching him play, he doesn't quite play like that, which I think is a good thing. I always get concerned when, you watch someone play and you're like, wait, they're how big? You think they're bigger. You think they're not as big as what the actual measurements are because they're playing smaller. Quite the opposite here with Pearsall. I think he plays bigger and, stronger than his actual size, BMI, whatever indicates. So talking about the wide receivers here, so the assumption being Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze being the first 3 receivers off the board. I assume it'll be in that order. Possibly Neighbors and Odunze flopped, whatever. But who's the 4th? Is it Brian Thomas Jr.? I think so. I assume is going to be what's going to happen. In my opinion, Troy Franklin is my wide receiver 4 in Dynasty. Means nothing to NFL teams. Just figured I'd say it because it's on my podcast, so why not? But Brian Thomas Jr., I understand, athletic marvel, wasn't asked to do a tremendous amount in terms of having a tremendously diverse route tree and, in terms of the sharpness and crispness of his routes and everything. When you're that athletically gifted, that's something that if you can sharpen it and hone it, that's tremendous. But if not, you're another tremendously athletic receiver that maybe didn't kind of reach that potential that, the NFL was hoping to get out of you there. But again, I do assume he's going to be the 4th one, but in my mind, it should be Troy Franklin. But I'd be perfectly happy if he falls to the Panthers at 33 and they get him, but we'll see. So in terms of the number of wide receivers going in the first round, I don't know the odds, but if you were to say it's over under 6.5, I would lean towards 6, but that's tough. So I'm thinking Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, and probably Franklin. I do think Franklin's going to be at the end there. The only wild cards for me are going to be McConkey and Worthy. I think more so McConkey than Worthy, but I think someone at the tail end of the first might pick McConkey, possibly. I don't think both McConkey and Worthy are going to be added there. That'll be 8 receivers. That'll be bananas. But 6.5, I would take the 6 there, but that's still a good number there. So jumping to the final pick for Finn. So this was the tight ends. So I had him pick between Ben Sinnott and Theo Johnson. And that was, I don't know, I couldn't tell if he was saying Jane Johnson or Brian Johnson. No idea. He meant Theo Johnson. And Stephen Chalmers, one of my buddies here, he definitely would be proud of my son picking the Penn State tight end Theo Johnson. I like Theo Johnson. Both of these guys tremendously athletic. Ben Sinnott is actually my tight end too. I do have him up there. He's someone who I'm hoping the Panthers actually do end up picking. If he falls to the 4th, awesome. Likely we'll probably have to get him in the 3rd. But 2 super athletic guys, after Brock Bowers, I think a lot of people are just looking to say, hey, is it Jatavian Sanders? Is it Theo Johnson? I'll throw Jared Wiley in there too. Is it, there's a number of guys who athletically tested well. And when you're looking for a tight end, that's a bit of, the marker of saying, hey, they're hitting a certain number of athletic metrics. We want to get this guy. So again, after Brock Bowers, who, is likely going top 10, top 12. I can't see him getting past 14, 15 at the most. Because I see him likely going to the Jets or the Colts. But after that, I mean, when is the next one going to be going? I don't know that we see one in the second. I do think it's going to pick up in the third, where you're going to see, probably Jatavian Sanders or something like that. So very interesting to see how some of these position groups are shaping out versus how they have previously. But that covers a little bit of an overview for the 2024 NFL Draft. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to recapping some of the dynasty relevant information in next week's episode after the draft. But I also, let's not get overwhelmed by rookie fever and forget about these veterans here. I also wanted to throw out a couple of buys and sells. So I had 3 buys and 3 sells, and for each it would be a quarterback, a running back, and a wide receiver. No offense to tight ends. Just didn't do it. So looking at my quarterback buy, I've got Sam Howell, the now Seattle Seahawk. So, I mean, for 2023, it was rough. So the amount of work and in the passing game he had was tremendous. The number of sacks that he had were equally as tremendous. It was not a tremendously efficient season for Sam Howell. I think this is an exceptionally exciting landing spot for Sam Howell. So we've got new coaching staffs and on both of these teams, on Washington and in Seattle. What does Seattle do is they come in, and one of the first things they did in terms of real moves and everything was trading for Sam Howell. And it was trading a 3rd and a 5th for Sam Howell, a 4th and a 6th. So kind of bumping up around each for those. So not bad at all. And I understand why Washington did this. Obviously, with where they're positioned, they're going to be going Jane Daniels, Drake May, who knows? Maybe J.J. McCarthy. I really hope not, but whatever. But looking at that, looking at what Geno Smith's contract looks like, again, after not 2023, but 2022 being his resurgent season. 2023, not quite as good as that 2022 season, and I don't think that that's necessarily his fault, but, you have a new coaching staff, and it is unlikely, I would say, I don't know the odds, it's unlikely that Seattle's going to be drafting a quarterback in this draft, I would assume. So a very real possibility. I do think it's Geno's job day one or week one, but I also think that whether it's at some point in this season, whether it's Geno plays out this season and he actually only has $13.5 million dead cap after, after this season, so after the 2024-2025 season, if he were released, and he will actually be an unrestricted free agent after the 2025-2026 season. I do think, for all intents and purposes, just seeing how Geno carries himself, he seems like a tremendous leader. Glad to see his career got back on track, at least to some degree, and Seattle seems to be a great place for him. But with a new coaching staff, I don't know what their vision of it is. I think Howell, very well could beat him out, but I think it's more likely that he is asked to kind of sit behind Geno and kind of learn. Talking about just in terms of value, I mean, there's actually 2 dynasty trades that I've done in the last month and a half, I want to say. So in a 12-team start 9 Superflex PPR half-point 10 in premium, I sent away Jake Ferguson and Mason Rudolph, and I got Sam Howell and the 2024 309. So, and again, there was the minor tight end premium, not tremendous. I had, it's Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz. I have 2 other guys, Jelani Woods, and I can't remember who the other tight end is, but a pretty solid team. I have, Pat Mahomes, have a couple of good running backs with a bit of depth there too. Have, DK Metcalf, have number of good receivers as well. Overall, planning on competing. And looking at this, Sam Howell is not acquired in the mindset of competing, but with my first quarterbacks being Pat Mahomes and Jared Goff, I figured adding a bit of depth as it's Hendon Hooker and then being able to add Sam Howell, I think that's tremendous in terms of him actually possibly getting a chance and then adding another starting quarterback to that room for my dynasty team when he's not a starter yet, and let him increase his value there. Jumping over to a second dynasty trade that I had done as well, and this one is different leagues, much, much shallower. This one, I think I did this one pretty quickly after this trade happened just because of my infatuation with Sam Howell. 10 teams start 8 Superflex PPR, no tight end premium. So I sent away Aaron Rodgers and 2 2025 thirds for Sam Howell, the 2024 508, and a 2025 third. So for me, I had gotten Aaron Rodgers at a lower point, buying low, if you will. And 40-year-old Rodgers, I do, as far as I know, he's healthy, he's ready to rock. But I do believe there is some concerns in terms of, hey, he has a good season this year. Maybe they get him Brock Bowers in the draft. That accentuates the Garrett Wilson, that sort of thing. But I don't know how much more football he wants to play. I really don't. And I don't think it's going to be indicative of if he wins a Super Bowl, then he'll walk away. I don't know that that holds any bearing either. I sincerely believe that this could very well be his last season, more so, ideally, him being able to stay healthy and getting a chance to finish his season and willingly walk away from the game of football versus having it stripped from him a couple of snaps into his first game as a Jet and tearing his Achilles. So I'm not basing that off of any news or anything like that. I just, with how the last couple of years have gone for Rodgers, I can very well believe that he could finish this season. I think it's going to be a successful one with how the Jets are looking talent-wise, and hopefully he can break that curse of the Jets being the Jets, basically. But we shall see. So jumping over to my second buy, that is Tony Pollard, running back for now the Tennessee Titans after his first, well, the entirety of his career to this point with the Dallas Cowboys. So you've got the GM. So he was hired in January of last year, and he is getting a chance to kind of put his stamp, he and the owner, of course, putting their stamp on this team after relieving the coach of their duties. And this is interesting, bringing over the OC Callahan from Cincinnati over to Tennessee. And he got a pretty good deal, I will say. So $21.75 million in terms of average annual value. That's 9th among running backs right now. And it's a 3-year deal, but effectively a 2-year deal. There is an out after 2025. And depending on if it's 2025 or 2026, he'll be 29 or 30 years old at that point. So for him, he's entering a backfield where his real competition is Tyjae Spears. And Tyjae Spears, he did pretty well last year. He really did. His rookie season, I know there was concerns that he was going to have tremendous knee issues, and he looked okay to me. But the interesting thing about this, though, is when you lose Derrick Henry, I know we talked about there's the Audric, Estime, and Braelon Allen, in terms of the bigger running backs coming in, bigger bruising types. It's tough to really think of who can replace Derrick Henry. So, like, when they are going to get another running back, I don't think it should be as narrowly focused as, all right, what's the closest to Derrick Henry we can get? I think with the new coaching staff coming in and the GM making some moves here, this is him trying to, put his print on it and say, hey, we've got Will Levis, and he's in his second year. We're going to get another receiver. We're going to get this running back after letting Derrick Henry walk. And I don't know. I mean, after Pollard now getting a full healthy offseason after injuring his leg at the end of the prior season going into 2023, improving the O-line for Tennessee. Tennessee did not have a tremendous O-line last season. And presumably they're going to be getting Joe Alt in the draft. They could trade back a little bit and take a different tackle if they wanted to. But I have to believe they're going to be addressing the offensive line in not only the first round, but possibly other rounds as well. And for Pollard, I do expect steady volume for him. So, again, Pollard is not a replacement for Derrick Henry in terms of, I do think Spears can take a step up in terms of maybe a bit more of what he's doing. But even in a down year for Tony Pollard in 2023, I'm not disagreeing. It was a down year. I agree. But he was the RB14 in overall scoring, and that was largely not points per game, just overall scoring. Points per game is important, I know. Just want to point that out. But a lot of that had to do with the volume that he was getting, both in terms of rushing attempts and in terms of targets. So all that being understood, and in terms of points per game, just so we can get that out of the way as well, he was in the ballpark of Kenneth Walker and Brian Robinson. So not bad. I know that not Tony Pollard that we want him to be, but given him coming back from an injury that, that team and that offensive line was not what he used to be, I think he did okay. And I have a trade here I'm going to talk about here in a second. If I can get him as a buy low candidate, I think he's someone who can contribute for 2 years. Is pretty reasonable, pretty fair. A trade that I had actually done, I think in the last 2 weeks, I want to say, 10 teams start 8 superflex PPR no tight end premium, so the same league as the second Howell trade before. So sent away Quentin Johnston, the 2024 307, and a 2025 third, and got Tony Pollard and the 2024 503. Just kind of throw him and pick there. So I'm viewing that as I got to get rid of Quentin Johnston, which is pretty awesome. And a big reason for that, too. One, I don't think he's it. I had traded for him during last season in the hopes that he would increase his value at least somewhat. He didn't really, not tremendously so. So I was okay sending him away. And for Pollard, for this team, it just kind of seemed like it was a good get for value and a good chance to trade away Quentin Johnston was kind of the crux of why I was doing that. For Quentin Johnston, we do again have the draft coming up. I have tremendous concerns that it seems all rosy right now that he's going to hopefully at least get a bunch of chances with the Chargers next season. I don't know. I mean, I think he will maybe more than last season, but I don't think that's saying a lot, and I don't think he showed a tremendous amount last season that I'm he can build off of it, but build to what? Because this is also now a new coaching staff and everything. So in his second season, he's getting used to his second offensive system and that kind of stuff. So he didn't do well with the first one, at least in terms of really adjusting everything. So I don't know what that means for his next year. So going to the third buy, that is Stefon Diggs, some people are saying the third best wide receiver in Houston. Wild. So he enters, joining the Houston Texans alongside Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Tank Dell hopefully healthy and doing well. Nico Collins having a tremendous breakout season here. Of course, much thanks to CJ Stroud. But Stefon Diggs, rework deal, so he will become a unrestricted free agent, as I understand it, after this season coming up here. So he'll be a 31-year-old free agent. And that was, of course, reworked with the Bills taking a boatload of the cap hit and the Houston restructuring it so he no longer is, I guess, beholden to them, which you could look at as a prove-it year, and he could either stay if he likes it or seemingly just a show of good faith. But talking about last season, I know people were talking about Stefon Diggs seemingly falling off, so to speak. I mean, let's see. He had more 100-plus yard games than Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Michael Pittman. Another thing, which is good, at least when you're on a good offense, which, again, he will be here. He had 8 touchdowns, 7 of which were in the red zone. So for all those people kind of talking about him having some of his issues, at a minimum, I do think he is still doing tremendous work in the red zone. I think when you have guys like that, you have Nico Collins and Stefon Diggs working on the outside. You have Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz in the middle. Not a bad problem to have. And, I mean, for those talking about the drop-off, it wasn't as good as last season, but last season was either his best season, like in totality, not he broke every of one of his personal records, but in its totality, that was either his best or at worst second best season in his career. So suffice to say, if that's the barometer, then yes, he fell off. But I don't think he's a shell of himself. I don't think, these are not the same players, but we're seeing what Keenan Allen's doing right now, and I believe a year or two older than Diggs, maybe 3 actually. Again, not the same player, but I don't think we just need to get in our minds he's now 29, 30, 31. Like these guys are getting up there at that age, and it's like didn't have a breakout career best season, so he must be done. He's not done, and whether you think he's the best or the second best receiver on that team, he's not the third best. I'll tell you that. He's best or second best. I think he's the best on the team, but I think Nico Collins had a tremendously efficient year, and I would love to see him build off of that. Can he be more efficient than last year? Probably not. That would be really tough. But can he be about as efficient and maybe increase his volume and everything like that with targets and all that? That would be ideal. So looking at a trade that I had done for him for Stefon Diggs, and this was probably another month and a half ago or so. So 12 teams start 10 Superflex, PPR half point 10 in premium. This was the same one I mentioned with the first Howell trade. So sent away the 112 Jelani Woods and a 2026 fourth to get Stefon Diggs. And again, this is a good team. Mahomes, Goff, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, all these guys. So overall, it's a good team. And the crux of it is basically it's sending the 112 for Stefon Diggs, but putting a little bit on top there with Woods and the 2026 fourth, whatever. I'm looking at this rookie draft, and I'm viewing this as the perfect, this is rookie fever in someone thinking, hey, I know it's super flex, but at the 112, I can get this. It's like, okay, I'll rather have Stefon Diggs. Give me Stefon Diggs for even just this season, knowing he's going to be in Houston, what that's going to mean. And if he leaves and, goes elsewhere, do we really think that after one season, I think it's going to be a good season? If he leaves, what does that mean? He's leaving to willingly sign somewhere else. That will be a tremendous opportunity for him. Or he could very well have a great season, what have you, and maybe sign like a 2-year deal in Houston to re-up and it not be super long, and he could just finish his career in Houston. Who knows? So I very much think that it's going to be good things for Stefon Diggs in 2024. So jumping over to my 3 sells here. And these are a bit more narrative-based, really not dropping any numbers necessarily, and 2 of these are actually guys on the same team. So I promise you, while I am a Panthers fan, I tried to have no bias, and this just kind of happened this way. So the first one here, Kirk Cousins. It's unfortunate because I really like him as a player. He seems like, a tremendous stand-up guy. And it's not so much thinking I don't think he's going to do well. I just think what we've become accustomed to, certainly in his recent years in Minnesota, playing with a Justin Jefferson, more recently playing with a TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison. KJ Osborne's no slouch, a tremendous third receiver for them, and obviously he's now going. He is now going to New England. But in terms of Kirk Cousins being, he's in his mid-30s, he is coming off of an Achilles tear. I know he's not a Lamar Jackson or even a Daniel Jones or what have you. He's not a mobile guy. We know that. But I do remember seeing in an interview he was talking about he's not 100% yet. That's not crazy or not a shock. I'm not saying anything on that. But he was kind of talking about the dropbacks are not really the issue. It's you're doing a bootleg, or you're needing to escape the pocket, or you needing to evade to then make the throw. That's where he maybe wasn't quite there yet. I do think he's going to get there. I'm not saying he can't heal up, but I have concerns that while all of this is happening, he is going to a new team, and this is a new group of guys. Again, they're good, but there's not a Justin Jefferson. I know Kyle Pitts is there, but TJ Hawkinson's no slouch. So it's really tough to have replicated what weapons and such he had in Minnesota in Atlanta. But he's got some good ones. I agree. I don't know that people can see that him going to a new team and being like, oh, maybe he can be better. That's a tall task. I don't think people realize how good and how productive and how consistent Kirk Cousins has been, certainly for fantasy in the last couple of years. So I think in terms of, so last year he was on pace. So before his injury, it was in terms of points per game, right around Jordan Love, Brock Purdy level. Pretty damn solid, right? Do we think he's going to do better than that on the Falcons? I don't think so. I think that would be his ceiling, and I don't even know if he's going to get that. I do think he'd be a point or maybe two lower than that on average. But that's also because he now has Bijan Robinson in the backfield, which is what he didn't have in Minnesota. So, at least certainly in recent years, I know Dalvin Cook, but So, I like him in Atlanta. I think it's going to be a nice, refreshing thing for the team because Desmond Ridder was not it. But I have concerns that people are maybe thinking that they're getting some version of Kirk Cousins. It's, oh, he's healthy. He'll be the same exact guy. I know he had Justin Jefferson, but now he's Drake London. I know he had T.J. Hawkinson, but now he's Kyle Pitts. It's like, but where are the upgrades happening? Again, outside of Bijan Robinson, I get it, but like, where are the upgrades happening? I don't know that I see those. Jumping over to the running back cell, DeAndre Swift, and another guy going to a new team. The big thing for me here, and I don't know if this is just my judgment being clouded by seeing what happened to Miles Sanders after he left Philly. He basically earned his deal with the Carolina Panthers in that final season with the Eagles. The Eagles did not re-sign him. And here, I know that the Eagles ended up paying Saquon a decent amount of money, but I think it's still a reasonably friendly deal there. And arguably Saquon, and I don't think this is a hot take, better than Miles Sanders, better than DeAndre Swift, better than Rashad Penny, who unfortunately could not get on the field. Man, I really wish that would have worked out. But for DeAndre Swift, again, he had a tremendous season in Philly. Going to a team where the O-line is a bit of a downgrade. And I know that they're building that team up on all facets to get it ready for Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is going into a pretty good situation. I'm not saying he isn't. And in terms of most rookie quarterbacks, I think they are normally going to a team where they walk in and day one are putting their team on their back. And as the quarterback, to an extent, you are. But it's not too bad for him. But then my concern is for DeAndre Swift, look what you had in Philly. And now look what you have in Chicago. And in terms of what he did last year for Philly from fantasy production, I think he's going to remain in that range, and I don't see him being able to climb above that. So he was a back-end RB2 range in terms of points per game. By no means is that bad. I feel like for people thinking that, this is going to be the best thing, I would argue, he was able to have a healthy season in Philly, and I think maybe it let people forget about what happened in Detroit. And thankfully, he was able to overcome, those injuries from Detroit, and I think he improperly got an injury-prone label and had a healthy season in Philly. But a healthy season in Chicago, what do we think that looks like? I'm not concerned with him losing work to Khalil Herbert, Hokie alum, or Roshan Johnson or anything like that. I'm not concerned with that. But I don't see where he's able to elevate his game from a fantasy perspective in Chicago from what he did in Philly last year. A tremendously RB-friendly, outside of the tush push and losing some touchdowns, tremendously fantasy-friendly running back spot. So last but not least, and I hope my Panthers bias is not showing, I have another Falcon here, Drake London, another sell for wide receiver. So I know I'm trying not to beat a dead horse when it comes to being a little bit glib and a little bit, not fully buying into what's happening with the Falcons right now. I do think the team is elevated. They brought in, I think, Darnell Mooney and I think Rondale Moore. Excellent depth, excellent additions there. And he does have some good weapons. Kirk Cousins does have some good weapons in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson out of the backfield, the two receivers I just mentioned. But again, what are we expecting out of Cousins? Like, I know that this is going to be, even in Kirk Cousins coming off of injury, this is going to be the best quarterback that Drake London's ever played with, bar none. Like, that's not. I don't think that's up for debate. That's not my question. I'm just trying to figure out how Drake London, who this will be his third season, he's yet to have a 1,000-yard season and has 6 total touchdowns between 2 seasons. Yes, he's played with atrocious quarterback play. That can directly affect a wide receiver's production. I'm not disputing that either. But I liked him coming out of USC, and the wild thing now is the narrative has built so much that I'm seeing on Keep Trade Cut, I believe it was the other day, as a top 12 receiver. And that does include Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors being ranked ahead of him. So technically he would be top 10 if those were not counted yet, since they're not drafted. I think that's crazy. I don't understand, even if his volume is maybe increased a little bit. Don't you also assume that Kyle Pitts is going to get his? Don't you assume, again, as we watched Kirk Cousins in Minnesota? I don't think the passing volume is going to be quite to that level, but I think they got good ancillary pieces in Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore, and again, can work with the running back there. Cousins is going to feed everybody, not equally. I do think Drake London's going to be the most targeted player, period, even more than Pitts and everything, but there's only so many passes that can go around. And with what Drake London has done thus far, again, if they get in more positions for Drake London to score, I understand those can go up, but I really don't see a top 12 finish. And I know that's not specifically what dynasty rankings mean, that like they're specifically always going to finish in that position. It's the age, it's the situation. I understand that. But gosh, it just feels like we're really overreacting to that. And I'm just not there yet. I do still think he's say a top 20 receiver, probably in the teens, I would say, maybe. But a top 10, top 12, that seems rich for me. So if someone's thinking that's what his value is, I recommend trading him and seeing what you can get back, whether it be picking a player if you're kind of leveling down a little bit, because depending on who you get, you might not really be leveling down. So, but those are my dynasty buys and sells, and that was a little bit of talk about the NFL draft. Please, please, please drop a comment down below. Let me know if a veteran you are buying or selling, whether it's a trade you actually did or just someone that off the top of your head you're in on or not so in on. And please, if you actually have done a trade, please go ahead and drop it in there. And let me know what you think of Finn's picks in terms of the rookies there. So tune in next week. I will be talking about the dynasty fallout from the 2024 NFL draft, and that has been episode 88.